Welcome to Thriller Recaps. Today, I am explaining the movie, Absolutely Anything, explaining every scene as it happens. Watch till the end, and please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy this. Neil Clarke, a middle school teacher, had a dream where his neighbor, Catherine West, whom he had a crush on, was presenting him with an award for his novel. While he was giving his speech, an alarming number of dogs, including his own dog, Dennis, started barking, disrupting the event and waking him up. He got out of bed and went to check who was knocking on his door. It was his neighbor, Fiona Blackwell, who complained about his dog barking and threatened to get animal services involved if the noise didn't stop. Neil leashed Dennis and took him for a walk. While outside, he saw Catherine checking her mail. He told her that she had featured in his dream, and she asked him a few questions about it before heading back to her apartment. Meanwhile, a space probe containing information about the human race was found by a group of aliens. Attached to it was a message of peace, which the aliens laughed at. Neil borrowed some money from his colleague and friend Ray at the school where they both worked. Later, at the supermarket, Neil heard someone sobbing in the aisle across from him. He went to check and found Catherine, who had had a bad day at work. He tried to console her before she left. The Alien Council watched videos of human behavior, finding it appalling. They debated whether to destroy Earth or to make a human part of their council. They decided to pick one random human for a test to see if humanity understood the difference between good and evil. One of the council members asked how the human would be tested. He was told that the human would be given all the powers of superior beings, which could do absolutely anything. If these powers were used for evil, the Earth would be destroyed. However, if used for good, the Earth would be spared, and the human would become a member of the council. Neil turned out to be the chosen one. He was given 10 days to use his powers for good so that Earth wouldn't be destroyed. Meanwhile, as Neil was on his way to work, he was pushed off the road by a vehicle. At that moment, the aliens sent the powers to him. Unaware of his new abilities, he cursed out the driver of the vehicle, and his words came true. Catherine and her friend Rosie talked about Neil. Catherine mentioned what Neil had done at the supermarket and that she found him likable. While Neil was trying to sneak into class after arriving late, the headmaster, Mr. Robinson, caught him. Mr. Robinson told Neil that he would have fired him if he could replace him due to his tardiness and irresponsibility, then walked back into his office. During lunch break, Ray asked Neil if there was anything he could wish for that would change his life. Neil wished for an alien spaceship to destroy his classroom students, which indeed caused an alien spaceship to kill everyone in that classroom. When Neil got home, he realized that he could do anything with a wave of his hand. He commanded his almost empty bottle of whiskey to exchange itself for a full bottle. As if possessed, the bottle started moving, hopping out of the building's exit. Neil and Dennis went after the bottle as it smashed into a liquor store, triggering the store's alarm. This drew a police officer's attention, and he attempted to arrest Neil. To escape, Neil commanded Dennis to bite the officer. They hid under a bush to avoid being caught, but when they emerged, Neil was immediately spotted. Using his powers, he disappeared in front of the officers and reappeared in his apartment. Realizing he could fix the deaths of his students, Neil wished that everyone who had died would come back to life. This caused all the dead people to rise as zombies. Horrified, he reversed the wish, asking that the explosion never happened. This returned him to the moment when the explosion had occurred while he was having lunch with Ray, who was wishing that Miss Pringle, whom he liked, could worship the ground he walked on. At work, Catherine received a visit from Colonel Grant Kotcheff, an obsessive one-night stand. He offered her an opportunity to get to know him better, but she declined, saying she didn't like him and wanted him to leave. Grant refused to listen until the TV producer at her workplace, James Cleverill, joined them. Putting his arm around Catherine, James insisted that Grant leave, so he did. Neil used his powers to make his classroom students studious and Mr. Robinson nice to him. Catherine told Rosie about her ordeal with Grant and how his obsessiveness scared her. Neil then wished for Miss Pringle to worship his friend Ray, which surprised Ray, as he had had a crush on her for so long but couldn't tell her. On his way home, Neil wished to become the president. Suddenly, a limousine drove by, and bodyguards rushed out to grab Neil, who was now seen as the president. As he was being shot at, the bodyguards tried to shield him. Neil wished to go back to his old life, so he disappeared. At home, Neil used his powers to change his physique. He told Ray about his new abilities, but Ray didn't believe him. To prove it, Neil made a skeleton talk and throw itself out of the window. Ray, excited, suggested that with Neil's powers, they could get any woman they wanted. Meanwhile, Grant continued stalking Catherine. He offered her a ride home, which she rejected. He then gave her a key to an apartment he had rented for the two of them, but she insisted he back off. Rosie advised Catherine to sleep with Neil after Catherine complained that every man she had been with was a control freak. One night the galactic power glitched, causing Neil to lose his abilities temporarily while one of the aliens tried to fix it. Neil decided to make Catherine fall in love with him, but the wish failed. Unaware that his wish hadn't come true, Neil coincidentally heard a knock at his door. It was Catherine. She kissed him, and they went into his apartment, where they spent the night together. Colonel Grant, who had climbed a pipe to spy on them, saw this and fell from the pipe. The next day, Neil woke up to find a note from Catherine on the pillow next to him, indicating that she had left. Neil was excited after spending the night with Catherine. Using his powers, he dressed himself and prepared his breakfast. He explained his excitement to Dennis, who kept barking until Neil gave him the ability to talk. Dennis immediately asked for a biscuit, which Neil provided. While they were talking, the doorbell rang. Neil closed Dennis in a room to check who was at the door. It was Catherine. She tried to explain what had happened the previous night, but Dennis kept interrupting them. This caused a misunderstanding when Catherine heard Dennis shouting that he loved Neil, making her think Neil was gay. She rushed out of his apartment as Neil took away Dennis' ability to talk. Neil went after Catherine and encountered Grant, but he disappeared, confusing Grant. He then bumped into Ray, who said that he had to stop Miss Pringle, who had set up shrines all over the school where she worshipped him as a god. Neil explained that he was busy and couldn't help, but Ray insisted. Frustrated, Neil turned him into a sausage. Neil tried to explain things to Catherine, but she didn't want to listen and walked away. He turned Ray back from a sausage, who was then chased around by Miss Pringle and her cult members. Meanwhile, the group of aliens deliberated. One of them thought they should proceed with destroying Earth since Neil wasn't using his powers for good. The aliens decided to follow the rules they had set. Meanwhile, Catherine found Grant inside her apartment and locked him in, yelling at him from the hallway for letting himself in. Her outburst gained the attention of other residents. Neil invited Catherine to his apartment, offering to cook dinner, which she agreed to. He told Dennis that Catherine was coming for dinner and warned him to behave, threatening to take away his ability to talk again. During dinner, Catherine told Neil about her producer wanting to sleep with her in exchange for a new office. Neil confessed that he had powers and could do anything, but she didn't believe him. To prove it, he flippantly granted her wish for an office with a great view. Just then, Grant crashed into the apartment, claiming he was Catherine's fiancé, which she denied. The two men exchanged words, causing Catherine to walk away. When Grant tried to strangle Neil, Neil broke Grant's arm and then fixed it, revealing his ability to grant wishes with a hand gesture. Distracted by Dennis, Neil gave Grant enough time to immobilize him. Grant kidnapped Neil, tying and gagging him in his apartment to prevent his escape. He then gave Neil a list of selfish or absurd wishes, such as giving all pasty white English people huge ears and duck feet and threatening to shoot Dennis if Neil said something else. Meanwhile, James managed to get Catherine to agree to come to his apartment. He shocked her by telling her that she now had her own office. When she saw that it even had a great view, like Neil had wished, she dashed off to find him. Catherine headed to Neil's apartment, where she found it in disarray. She then discovered Ray hiding in Neil's closet. He explained that Miss Pringle and her cult planned to kill him as a ritual so he could resurrect as the god they thought he was. Catherine concluded that Grant must have kidnapped Neil. She rushed to her apartment with Ray following to get the apartment key Grant had given her, and they headed out to rescue Neil. Outside the apartment building, they were spotted by Miss Pringle and her followers, who chased after them. Meanwhile, Grant kept forcing Neil to make bizarre wishes, like giving police officers pink uniforms. Catherine and Ray reached the apartment just as Grant forced Neil to grant his wish of making Catherine love him. Catherine immediately jumped on Grant, wanting to be intimate with him. Neil used this opportunity to turn Grant into a dog and reverse all his previous wishes, including returning Catherine to normal. He also reversed the wish on Miss Pringle, who instantly showed her usual disdain for Ray before leaving. Catherine, upset with Neil, left with Ray. The aliens watched all this and thought Neil was pathetic and didn't understand the concept of good and evil. Neil tried inviting Catherine to a meal, but she refused. He confessed about using his powers to make her love him, which complicated everything. Catherine angrily told Neil she could never love anyone who could control her so easily. Back at his apartment, Neil decided to use his powers to grant everyone in the world as much food as they wanted, stop senseless wars, give everyone their dream house, and reverse global warming. However, he soon saw on the news that his wishes caused worldwide obesity, and all the land was taken over for houses, including the deserts. Seeing that only his wish to stop war had some success, Neil refined it with Dennis's help. He wished that there should be no reason to declare war anymore, but this backfired, causing several countries to declare war for no reason and plunging the planet into a global ice age. Neil quickly reversed all his wishes back to the way they were. Disheartened, he attempted suicide, telling Dennis to tell Catherine that he loved her and that he had made arrangements for his biscuits. He then jumped into the river. Dennis jumped in after him to save him, and since Dennis couldn't swim, Neil was forced to rescue Dennis and, by consequence, himself. Dennis acknowledged that Neil still loved him, which Neil agreed with, saying that he didn't love himself. Meanwhile, the aliens decided that Earth was not worthy. They had an inverted understanding of morality, seeing the outbreak of war as good and Neil's efforts to stop the war and improve life as weak and evil. Afterward, Neil tried calling Catherine, but she didn't pick up, which saddened him. Dennis advised him to give the power to him, assuring Neil that he wouldn't do anything without his permission. Neil thought it was a good idea and transferred his powers to Dennis. The aliens began the process of destroying Earth, but Dennis wished for the source of the power to be destroyed. This caused the aliens' doom weapon to bounce back to their ship, killing them all. Neil tested himself for powers, and realizing he no longer possessed them, he felt uplifted. He was in such good spirits that he kissed his usually grumpy neighbor, who was banging on his door. He then asked Catherine out. She didn't agree at first, disappointing him, but then she changed her mind and said yes. Grant, who was still a dog, asked Dennis to turn him back into a human, but Dennis refused, saying he liked him as he was. Subscribe for more daily videos. Your support, likes, shares, and subscriptions mean a lot. See you in the next video.